Let's talk once again about the Ron Paul candidacy. And I really want to call your attention here to the speech that Ron Paul gave. This, I think, tells essentially his political program is illuminated by the speech that he gave on the floor of the House of Representatives in March of 2001. This is in the congressional record. It's called The Beginning of the End of Fiat Money. March 13th, 2001. The beginning of the end of fiat money. And here we have this absolutely crucial quote. There is nothing to fear from globalism, free trade, and a single worldwide currency. Nothing to fear from globalism, free trade, and a single worldwide currency. Now, this is a model for a version of a new world order. You could call it golden globalism for short, since we had the that festival out there in Hollywood this week, not the golden globalists, but Ron Paul qualifies as a golden globalist, I think, based on this speech, which is programmatic. It lays out, I think, an entire worldview. Nothing to fear from globalism, free trade, and a single worldwide currency. And one could say a one world currency. So one world globalism, free trade, which is global, and a one world currency. Isn't this rather strange? My short title would be Golden Globalism. My long title, my analytical title of this would be Ron Paul's neo-feudal, neo-Confederate, hyper-deflationary, one-world dystopia. Dystopia being a bad utopia, right? Things like, something in the future that you don't want to have. Now, let's look at globalism. Once again, what is globalism? What does this mean? Well, it's the doctrine that emerged after the weakening and the fall of the Soviet Union. The U.S. could essentially dictate to most places around the world. A lot of the smaller countries had no alternative. They could no longer play the U.S. against the Soviets and eke out a margin of maneuver for themselves. So globalism comes down to the Washington Consensus, or the rules of the International Monetary Fund. The shock therapy that was practiced in Russia by Chubais and Nemtsov and Gaidar in the 1990s is an example of globalism. Deregulation, no more regulations. Deregulate derivatives, deregulate health, right? Thatcher had fought hard to deregulate the cow industry, right? The cattle, and we got mad cow because Thatcher didn't want to pay for inspectors. Deregulation of everything, mainly derivatives, banks, financial practices, right? Privatize everything. Ron Paul's Restore American Budget has him selling off large amounts of U.S. public lands, U.S. minerals, U.S. public buildings. It doesn't go into details, but it's a large number. Deregulation, privatization, union busting, and of course that's Ron Paul's nationwide right-to-work law, meaning union busting law. That's globalism, globalization, the race to the bottom, what we've been seeing. We'll be back in a minute to talk more about golden globalism. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're just continuing with our analysis of Ron Paul's speech to the House of Representatives here, March 13th, 2001, the beginning of the end of fiat money. And this is available on his website. I'm not making any of this up. And during one of the two debates this week, Ron Paul said it's perfectly legitimate to take issue with candidates based on political positions that they have taken. So here we go. There's nothing to fear from globalism. I think there's a lot to fear from deregulation, privatization, union busting, the selling off of government assets, essentially the auctioning off of the state sector, which exists in quite a number of countries. The race to the bottom, shock therapy, that's globalization. That's what caused the industrial production of Russia, for example, to go down by about 60% during the 1990s. Russia, the shock therapy in Russia is the latest example of the failure of Austrian economics, right? The deflationary, inflationary and then deflationary crash, which they went through. That was Austrianism all the way. Then he says there's nothing to fear from free trade. Well, free trade essentially means that no government will have any control over commodities crossing its borders. This has been one of the appurtenances of the modern state. If you cannot tax that, you cannot even check up on it. It's not fair trade. It's not managed trade. There is no need for the WTO, World Trade Organization, which is bad. But then you're going to get something worse, which is complete anarchy and the ability, for example, of a government to finance itself using a modest tariff on some commodities, or to protect itself against dumping, for example. There'd be no barrier against dumping. This would be the anarcho-capitalist or right-wing anarchist world order. So globalism, which diminishes the role of the state, the inability to protect the citizen, it, of course, magnifies the power of neo-feudal financial groups who are rewarded with no tax on capital gains, no tax on their estates, their inherited wealth. And then we're told that there's nothing to fear from a one-world currency, which would be gold, of course. It would be a one-world commodity currency, which would not be controlled by any government. So he wants it not to be done by the interlocking cabal of privately owned central banks and the Bank for International Settlements and the International Monetary Fund, where the Fed and the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan meet and try to dominate the world. But it's done through the anonymous mechanisms of the market. Now, if you add into this the idea of a completely atomized population, because of these right-to-work laws, right? The role of the trade union, this really deserves some sociological research. Don't wait for the sociologists to do it, but the role of trade unions and their related organizations in the institutional context of modern society in the United States, Europe, Japan, and elsewhere, I think is an absolutely crucial one. And if you simply destroy these unions, you will have gone quite far towards destroying civil society. And civil society is the ability of society to fight back against the inevitable aberrations of the state. So Ron Paul pretends to be the big enemy of statism, but his practical policies would exalt statism in the sense of dictatorship, the negative side of statism, in a way that I don't think anybody else would. Because if there's no union, and again, you see it today, if Walker wants to be a fascist despot in Wisconsin, who's going to fight him? Well, it's the unions that are fighting him. Same thing for Snyder in Michigan, same thing for Daniels in Indiana, same thing for Kasich in Ohio, and I'm sure it's coming. There was even a fight in Maine about a process reform in terms of voting ability. So this is a new world order. This is a one-world recipe, and I think it's dystopian. It would be essentially neo-feudal. I call it neo-Confederate for cultural reasons. It would be hyper-deflationary, because if you make gold the universal medium of exchange, right, the only money that's allowed in the world, that will magnify through deflation. It will increase the wealth of people who have wealth, and it will increase the immiseration of people who have debt. So the moneyed power will be exalted by this return. And again, that's not speculation. Go back to the United States from 1870 to 1900 or 1910, the Specie Resumption Act, the Coin Act, the deed done in the dead of night, the Cross of Gold, that was the huge issue. In Britain in the 1920s, a return to the gold standard caused unbelievable unemployment. And similarly in Britain, right after the Napoleonic Wars, the horrors of that system, which is cataloged by people as different as Shelley or Byron or Dickens, right? That's that world. This is an empire. This is a world empire. It is a one-world dystopian empire where the nation-state has ceased to exist. There's also the question of Ron Paul's theory of secessionism, right? he relies on these historians that I hold in a minimum high regard. Thomas Woods, who wants to tell you how great nullification and interposition were. These are Confederate doctrines that really ended at Appomattox. They're gone, but he wants to revive them. He wants to nullify the sacrifice of the Union dead and indeed the entire Civil War. And then he's also got this guy DiLorenzo, the resident Lincoln hater and a very, very sloppy historian from a professional point of view. The idea is that secessionism is okay. So you can see this is an attack on the modern state and the undoubted benefits that it has brought in favor, not in favor of something better, because I don't see that at all, but in favor of a one-world empire which would be dominated by an oligarchy of wealth. It would be a worldwide plutocracy. And I think if you look, Ron Paul's argument with the neocons and people like this seems to be the following. Ron Paul basically says, neocons and indeed Brzezinski, you people are wrong. You neocons only want to bomb and invade directly. Can't be done. We don't have the money. Too hated, too isolated, too broke. Brzezinski, you with your color revolutions, but your color revolutions don't always work. And then you want to be able to go to military action like Libya or what you're proposing for Syria and Iran, right, where the color revolutions don't work. He says, I can do it better. I can essentially overcome this resistance not through military means, but through purely economic means. In other words, I'm not going to go and lean on people militarily. I'm going to change the economic structure of the world in a way that will make nation states impossible, so that then the resistance of Syria and Iran and Russia and China will then collapse. So what you'd be left with is the dictatorship of an international plutocracy under, what can we say, unspeakable conditions, right? Worse than Dickensian, right? This would be primitive accumulation of the type we saw in the early Industrial Revolution. No child labor laws. We just had the child labor laws mocked and ridiculed this week in the Republican debates. Ron Paul says Head Start is unconstitutional. That will have to go. Unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is unconstitutional. That has to go. It'll be privatized, meaning powerful private interests will take this all up. And at the same time that we have the end of the modern state, we also have the end of the traditional family, because the deregulation of marriage simply means that. He's advocating the deregulation of marriage so that whatever setup any church calls marriage will become legal. And I wonder, when you watch these debates, you see how well Ron Paul gets along with Romney, the biggest warmonger. Is there the idea there that if you deregulate marriage, the Mormons could bring back polygamy? I don't know. That seems to be not far from the surface. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Just back to this landmark speech by Ron Paul, March 2001 in the House of Representatives. He said, pardon me, nothing to fear from globalism, free trade, and a single world currency. So one world globalism, one world free trade, one world market, right? A single market for the world, one world market. One world globalism, one world market, and a one world gold commodity currency. This means, of course, the destruction of the nation states as we've known it, and he seems to match that up with the end of the traditional family, because the deregulation of marriage, of course, would roll back centuries of social progress, the status of women, status of children, property rights for women. You know, is it going to be I divorce thee, I divorce thee, I divorce thee? If some church says that, will polygamy be allowed? Can the Mormons, some of them come out from under, right? Will they have Warren Jeffs all over the place? Or maybe polyandry, right? Certain nirvana religions seem to incline in that direction. Now, in this speech, the beginning of the end of fiat money, March 13, 2001, Ron Paul also tells you what are the barriers on the way to the world that he wants. And he says, quote, efforts to achieve peaceful globalist goals, and I think he means by that his goals, because that's what he's just said, efforts to achieve peaceful globalist goals are quickly abandoned when the standard of living drops, unemployment rises, stock markets crash, and artificially high wages are challenged by market forces. That seems to be saying the immediate effect of what I'm telling you is all that, all those bad things. when tight budgets threaten spending cuts, cries for expanding the welfare state drown out any expression of concern for rising deficits. So his political problem is, how do you apply the extreme savage austerity of Austrianism under conditions of democratic rule? Well, it seems to be the practical answer he's found is to organize a movement of people who are essentially duped and who then want to, they're calling for their own throats to be cut, in effect. A lot of people were duped by Obama, 2008, and I'm afraid a lot of them are getting duped this time around. And I'm telling you this because I was able to call that in 2008. I know what I'm talking about. Take this seriously. Don't just write it off. I knew what I was talking about then, and I know what I'm talking about now. We're told that the crash of 1921 is a model for our future, more or less what we've just heard. Of course, the crash of 1921 was not that long in the United States because we had a healthy industrial base, which we do not have in this junk heap of a post-industrial economy today. But in the 1920s, it was the crash of 1921 that sent British unemployment up into the millions, and it never came down until World War II. And look a little bit further. How about Italy? What's the effect of the crash of 1921 in Italy? Well, crash of 1921 is followed in 1922 by Mussolini's March on Rome, October 1922. Is there a connection? I think there is. The crisis got worse, and that set the stage for a fascist seizure of power. I'm told that if you oppose Ron Paul because of his austerity plans, and let me also cite this, some of this comes from an article by Paul Craig Roberts, who has had certain merits, of course, in anti-war and 9/11 questions. But now he says America's last chance, and America's last chance, according to him, is Ron Paul. He says a number of things about it, but one of the things he and others have suggested is if you oppose Ron Paul because of the savage austerity, you're saying that American lives are more important than the black and brown or yellow people of the impoverished third world. No. Let's take U.S. Department of Agriculture Food for Peace. Remember, emergency food aid on this planet, 57% of this comes from the U.S. With all the flaws, I don't care. This tends to put some kind of a floor under the world famine situation. Ron Paul wipes out food for peace. It goes to zero. At this point, 57% of the existing food aid in the world ceases to exist. And I say to you, that means millions of deaths, more than those killed by Bush and Obama. And all of their efforts, because economic genocide, as Robert McNamara, going from the Pentagon to the World Bank, proved, you can kill more with famine and malnutrition than you can kill with bombs. By far. There is no comparison. So I don't want to hear that nonsense either. We're told here, Paul Craig Roberts says, only Ron Paul respects the U.S. Constitution and its protection of civil liberty. Well, let's take a look at that. I think it's baloney. Ron Paul I see as in conflict with the U.S. Constitution. The General Welfare Clause appears twice in the preamble and in the specific responsibility of Congress. What does the General Welfare Clause mean to Ron Paul? Nothing, as far as I can see. The Constitution says that the Congress has the right to borrow money. Ron Paul says, no, the Austrians know better. That the Congress has the ability to regulate money. Well, we've heard no, because that's going to be a gold currency that's going to be beyond the reach of any government. The Congress has the right to impose tariffs, according to the 18 enumerated powers. No, says Ron Paul. And of course, the elastic clause, the necessary and proper, goes out the window. The 14th Amendment, no state shall deprive anybody of the equal protection of the laws. Ron Paul says no. His newsletter, the most recent things in his newsletter say that if you're a black teenager at the age of 13, you should be tried as an adult. The implication is that white teenagers of 13 are younger and shouldn't be tried as adults. So there's no equal protection of the laws. There's certainly no ability of the president in the 14th Amendment to make good on the public debt, overriding congressional obstructionism. He doesn't like the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators. That's not oligarchical enough. So this is the program of plutocracy. And again, the secessionism we've mentioned, states' rights. This reminds me of the fugitive slave law. Remember that in the 1850s, the Kansas-Nebraska Compromise said that if a slave flees to Massachusetts, they got to send him back. Massachusetts replied by passing a personal liberty law to block that. What did the slavocrats, what did the slave power conspiracy say at that point? They said, down with Massachusetts, we're overriding the states' right of Massachusetts. The point was not states' rights. The point was the state's right to impose slavery, or better yet, just slavery. And today, we're told it's great to have the ability of states to choose to be unionized, right? Non-right to work. But if they can, Ron and Rand and just about all the Republicans, even Santorum now, has come around to say it's time to impose this national right to work law. So they're going to ride roughshod over what New York or Illinois or California or Massachusetts want. When it comes to union busting now or slavery yesterday, states' rights go out the window in the first minute. So this pure demagogy, and it's not encouraging. The racial element is unavoidable. We have a very interesting quote from Hubert Humphrey. I've got this in Obama, the Postmodern Coup, page 196. Hubert Humphrey said in 1976, candidates who make an attack on Washington are making an attack on government programs, on blacks, on minorities, on the cities. It's a disguised new form of racism, a disguised new form of conservatism, again, reactionary. This is, and then I write, 4 years ago, this is, of course, a good diagnosis of the monetarist Friedmanite demagogy of Ronald Reagan in 1980 or of Ron Paul today. But it was pioneered before Reagan by Carter. Yes, so this is the oligarchy, the plutocracy in general. The Mormons, this convergence that we see between Ron Paul and Romney. What is it? That the presence of Ron Paul locks up to now maybe 22% of the Republican votes, which would otherwise be divided among some opponent of Romney. So in a sense, he takes about 1/5 of the Republican votes and puts him in the deep freeze so that Romney can then hope to get a larger proportion of the others. You saw Ron Paul defending Romney on the Bain asset stripping issues, and you see him in the debates. He's attacking Santorum. Sometimes he attacks Gingrich as a serial hypocrite or whatever it is. Doesn't attack Romney. How come Ron Paul doesn't attack Romney? Because Romney is out there saying, we have to be so strong that nobody will dare attack us. We need 100,000 more troops, and so forth. Take a look at the Lucy Commissar blog, and you will see stuff about Romney, not even at Bain, but as a member of the Marriott board. So, again, we went through the deregulation of marriage. So Romney needs all the help he can get. He's a brittle candidate. Huntsman is now dropped out in favor of his cousin Mitt. And again, Ron Paul seems to be serving as a kind of hidden auxiliary of the Romney campaign. And Romney is the biggest warmonger. So if you really think that Ron Paul is the key to peace, he's the authentic peace angel, why doesn't he attack Romney directly and personally as a warmonger? And I don't see it happening. So we'll be back with you again next week, God willing.